Joining us now is a man who is the Broadway equivalent of a five-tool player in baseball. He graduated from New York University's Tisch School of the Arts in 2019, and just four short years later, he made his debut on Broadway as Alex Mann in New York, New York. He appeared last month at the Tonys, performing their Cheering for Me Now with the cast of New York, New York. It is a pleasure to welcome the pride of Greenwich, Connecticut, Oliver Prose, to New Sports Talk New York. Welcome, Oliver.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, our pleasure. So, I believe you're only 25 years old. And I took a look at your resume and it lists the following sports: baseball, basketball, bowling, football, running, sprint, skateboarding, soccer, softball, swimming, backstroke, breaststroke, tennis, trampoline, volleyball. So I guess the first question is, how did you find the time to do all that as well as hone your acting skills?
I definitely didn't find the time to do all of that. I think I played sports like from a very young age growing up, and I didn't start doing theater performing arts really until I got into high school. So I played baseball, soccer, basketball from a young age, and then when I got into high school, I started doing theater more seriously, and I couldn't really do organized sports so much, but I always have loved sports. I'm like a huge Mets fan. My mom grew up in Flushing. My grandpa watched every single game. I'm a huge Knicks fan, so I've been sort of involved in sports my whole life. But yeah, once I got to a certain point of starting to take theater and performing a little more seriously, then it definitely did become harder to do all those other things.
So at what point did you realize that, okay, this is my passion? I want to pursue being an actor. And was there one particular actor that lit that passion, or a role or something you saw either in the movies, on Broadway, or television?
Well, I think it was interesting. My brother, who's 3 years older than me, he did theater in high school, and he was very good. So I would go to see him and his friends in plays and in shows, and I always sort of looked up to him and them. So when I got to high school, I was like, "Oh, I'm going to do this." At first, it was just sort of like for fun because I wanted to be with my brother, and it looked like fun. So the first play I did in high school was The Wild Duck by Henrik Ibsen, which I was actually in with my brother. It was the only play we've ever done together. And I did that, and then the year after that, I was looking for some type of like summer thing to do, and I stumbled upon the NYU Tisch summer high school program, and I saw the word acting, and I was like, oh, I like acting, I'll do that. And I went to their summer program, and that was like the first time I ever realized I was like, oh, this is something you can study. This is something you can pursue as a career. And I feel good when I'm doing it. I feel sort of like, in school, I always got decent grades, but I never felt like there was any subject that I was like, oh, I'm really good at this, or I feel like I have an intuition about this. And with performing and acting, I felt that way. So I came back to high school as a junior, sort of starting that whole college process, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna pursue acting in this to study acting, and that's what I did. And sort of since then, I was in my mind gung ho about being a professional actor, and it took a little bit of time, but I say that I got there.
Nice. So, I know that you played Danny Zuko as a senior in the Greenwich High School production of Grease. And when we've talked to athletes over the years on this show, we asked them who was one of their earliest coaches that had a huge influence on them. So, the director of that high school graduation production of Grease was Patty Sirigliano. What was the most important thing you learned from her and that particular production?
Hmm. I think that production taught me to, you know, to let go. I think I was the past two musicals that we had done before that were Rent and Children of Eden, which are two very sort of heavy in a way, kind of mature musicals, and Grease was like the exact opposite of that. And I definitely needed to learn to sort of take myself a little less seriously, and realize that this is something fun. We're singing and dancing up on a stage for people, and that was something that that show and Miss C, my one of my theater directors in high school, definitely helped me to realize she and that theater program was such a huge influence on me going into college and afterwards. I mean, it was an incredibly prolific program. We did so many shows per year. We did Ibsen, Chekhov, Shakespeare, all of these playwrights that going into college, I probably shouldn't have known who they were, and yet I did. So I'm incredibly thankful to her and that program for teaching me so many things at such a young age. Missy was actually able to come see New York, New York about a month ago. And it was such a wonderful sort of full circle moment, of this person who was teaching me since I was 14 years old, being able to come see me make my Broadway debut. And yes, that program and her husband, who was the play director, taught me so much about acting and performing, and I'm incredibly grateful to them.
That's so awesome that she got to see you perform on Broadway. That is incredible. So it's also one thing to star in a high school production. You also mentioned that your brother was also, liked acting. So in the sports world, the odds of making a career out of baseball, football, basketball are so infinitesimal. How encouraging were your parents pursuing your dreams of becoming an actor?
They were and are incredibly encouraging. I mean, I think the main thing is that they never really asked me to stop or to not do it. I think that like so often that is the thing that either parents or people who are in a position that are similar to parents can do for their kids is to influence them to either stay or to stray from whatever path they're on. And they never said to me, hey, have you ever thought about going into med school or law school? My brother's a lawyer, so then have you ever thought about going to law school? They never asked me to do that. They came to see every production I've ever been in, and from the moments that they saw me in high school, um, sort of told me and assured me that no matter how much rejection or how little of this thing that I was able to actually do, that this is something that is possible for me. And that was something that I needed and need, because if my parents were to say, hey, we're not super confident about this, we really think that you should start thinking about some other things, I would listen to them, because I really do trust them and think that they would be honest with me. And they were honest with me in that, saying that I should keep trying and keep pursuing this, even when it was something that looked bleak. um, uh, and it's not something that all parents do. So they they are an incredible support system. And my mom is a huge theater person. She goes to see so many plays and shows, and she would take me. We are from Connecticut, so it was not too long of a train ride to get into the city when I was younger. So she would take me to plays and musicals, and always was incredibly encouraging that that was something that was possible for me.
You mentioned, when things were bleak, and we mentioned in the open that you graduated NYU Tisch School in 2019. March of 2020, Broadway, 41 Broadway theaters closed their doors. Once COVID numbers declined, vaccines became available, Broadway finally reopens in 2021. for the first few years, I know you were working as an administrative assistant at NYU while sending out self-tape auditions. So many people were affected by the pandemic. What were some of the thoughts that going through your mind at that time, and how did that pandemic affect that, your probable circle of friends who were aspiring actors?
It was huge. I mean, I graduated in 2019, and I did two regional shows pretty soon after graduation. I did a production of Matilda in Nantucket, and then I went to Arizona and did a play called Master Harold and the Boys, which closed on March 1st of 2020. So I got back from Arizona. I had a couple auditions. Things felt like they were starting to roll. And then about 10 days later, yeah, Broadway shut down. Everything started shutting down. My partner and I left the city. We went to my parents' house in Connecticut. We assumed we were going to be there for a week, maybe 2 weeks, while things got back to normal. And we ended up being there for months. And when we got back to the city, it became quickly apparent that for me, and I think for a lot of especially young actors, things had very drastically shifted. When theater live performance started to come back, it, it was a lot more difficult, I think, for people to include lesser known actors and things. I think uh, uh, production teams and directors and people creating shows were so scared and concerned about the state of the world and about making sure that people would come to see their show. It was a lot harder to take a chance on someone who didn't have many credits. So I think a lot of young actors were in a position where it was a lot harder to be seen. It was a lot harder to be, in the room for people in the first place, let alone to be cast in a production. So it felt sort of like any momentum that I or other young actors had gained maybe since post graduation had sort of been lost. So it felt a little bit like going back to square one once stuff started picking up again. And self tapes was just a whole new thing. I went to college for 4 years and had never filmed a self tape. And it's a completely almost different skill than doing an in-person audition. So that was a whole other learning curve to learn how to be able to do an efficient and good self tape in your apartment with what you had. And I did a lot of them from when they started in 2021 to the self tape I filmed for New York, New York. Um, uh, uh, I did a lot of self tapes, and I learned over time sort of what made a self tape, in my opinion, more effective than others. And yeah, it just sort of changed. But I was incredibly lucky to, I think, be sort of in the right place at the right time, sending in a self tape for New York, New York, getting the ability to come in and do my callback in person. And I was incredibly shocked that I was cast in this production, because it didn't seem like something that was super different from the hundreds and hundreds of other self tapes that I had sent for the past 2.5 years. Um, but yeah, it was an enormous change, but now it's definitely a new normal.
So let's throw in the fact that for your first Broadway role, you're working with the equivalent of two Hall of Famers in John Kander and Lin-Manuel Miranda. And just for good measure, let's throw in the five-time Tony Award-winning director in Susan Stroman. I have to imagine that it's both an absolutely amazing experience, but nerve-wracking at the same time. Can you share a little bit about that experience with our audience?
Yeah, it especially at first was definitely nerve-wracking, especially because it's my first experience. I was going in being like, these are such influential people who have worked with such accomplished actors and probably have such enormous expectations. And I didn't know if I was going to be able to go in and meet those. So I was incredibly nervous, but the second that we started rehearsing, my nerves were calmed. Uh, you know, these people are titans of our industry, but the second that you're in a room rehearsing with them, uh, they're such down to earth people that it becomes so easy to really forget all of the accomplishments and accolades and look at them for who they are. I mean, John Kander, who's 96 years old, was in our rehearsal room almost every single day, giving us notes, talking to us about the conception of these songs. Especially me as a Jewish person and a Jewish character, talking to me about his thoughts about the character's journey and what it means to him, and it was incredibly special. Sort of aside from who I knew them to be before I got into the show. I love Cabaret so much. It's one of my mom's favorite musicals. I've seen the movie a million times. And the second we started rehearsing, you forget all that stuff. And it's just this sweet, older man eating cookies, talking to you about Judaism. I'm so thankful that John and Stro and Lynn are all like that, because it made working in a place that might seem very stressful because of what it is. It sort of eased all of that right away.
I find that when no matter who it is, whether it be a Broadway actor, a comedian, an athlete, when we talk about their firsts and that moment, they all can recall it so vividly. It had left such an imprint on me that we've written 4 books on oral histories of various New York sports personalities' first. Walk me through the first opening night, your Broadway debut, and just what you recall about it.
It was I mean, it was a wild night. I didn't day sort of I didn't know what to expect. But the energy is something that I don't think I will ever forget, and maybe something that won't be matched. I say this is my first Broadway show. It's my Broadway debut. Hopefully there will be more, but even if there are more, I don't know if I will ever be in anything that is of the scale that this show is on. There's an incredible amount of people alone that came together to make this show what it was. So on opening night, all of those people came out to celebrate. And so there's so many people, and everybody is so excited and happy about what's about to happen and ready to celebrate it. So the energy is just off the wall. This step and repeat that I'm becoming sort of accustomed to, walking the red carpet, having everyone ask you questions. To me, it was a bit overwhelming, but I think every second I could, I reminded myself that it was in the service of celebrating what we had made. And taking that bow and being able to take in what the audience was giving us on that opening night, and then being able to go to the party afterward and celebrate with so many people who I never could have imagined how many people it took to make this show what it was. It was an incredible feeling. There's been nothing else in my life that I have felt that I could celebrate as much as I felt I was able to celebrate what we had done. So that was an incredible feeling.
I also have to imagine it's so tough to reel back those emotions when you're on stage. It's got to be such a tough task. But your resume also lists that you do a Boston accent, American New England accent, American New York accent, American Southern accent, British BBC English accent, British Cockney accent, Eastern European accent, Israeli accent, Jewish Yiddish accent, Polish accent, Russian accent. Alex Mann is a Jewish Polish immigrant. So obviously right in your lane there. How difficult is it to stay in character and maintain that accent every single day and not have it bleed into your everyday life?
You know, I have never found it bleeding into my everyday life, though. Um, Maybe after a certain amount of performances, if we had a second interview, I might say that it is. Um, I think actually doing the accent makes doing the show almost easier for me. There's something about it that when I'm able to do an accent or a voice, or if there's something that kind of grounds the character in something that is wholly separate from who I am outside of performance. It's like an anchor for that character. So every time I step on stage, the second that that accent comes out of my mouth, I'm reminded of who that character is. And it becomes almost easier to step fully into that character because it's so separate from, you know, how I speak and what I am when I'm not performing. So you know, I think doing the accent almost, you know, is easier than not for me. It's something, the Polish specifically is something that I uh, am sort of just familiar with, have been familiar with since I was young. Um, uh, yeah, it's something that it doesn't feel almost, it doesn't feel hard for me or feel like I need to like switch something in my brain. Um, and I really do love doing the accent. It's something that I've grown to love, sort of the freedom that the accent gives me in terms of the vocal choices that I can make. It's something that, yeah, it feels like, I think freedom is a good word. Because nobody knows me as a Polish speaking person, it gives me the freedom to be anybody or do anything, especially on any given night. So I've grown to really love the accent and specifically the accent on Alex Mann. Um, and yeah, we'll see. We'll see if at a certain point it starts to bleed into my everyday life.
So, of all those accents that I listed, which do you feel is your strongest? And could you just give us a sample of that?
Oh God. Um,
You thought this was going to be easy, right?
Yeah, I didn't think I was. Yeah, I didn't think it was going to be partially an audition. Um, uh, well, I think actually, like the Eastern European accents are probably the ones that are easiest for me, like Polish, Russian. Um, uh, all of the other accents are ones that we either studied in school or I've had to do for some type of audition. Like, does it list South African on there?
No.
Oh, okay. So I had to do a South African accent for a play that I was in, and the first day of rehearsal, our director was like, "Try it," and I was like, "I, I, I can't. I don't know what that sounds like." I had to do like extensive dialect coaching for that. And even now, like if I tried to do a South African accent right now, it would be horrible. Like I would need to sit down and like listen and like pick it back up again. Um, Something like accents for me, it's something that is easy for me to pick up on, but doesn't live like at the forefront of my brain. Um, uh, I definitely need to like sit down and listen to someone speaking, sort of pick up on something, use a couple of sounds to anchor, and then I feel comfortable doing the accent. Um, you know, like Russian is very easy for me to do because I know so many Russian people in my life. But and Polish is sort of similar. But anything else, I don't know if I necessarily want to offend anyone or you or myself.
Gotcha. So your musical number is one of those Kander and Ebb buried treasures. I believe it was written for a production called Golden Gate that never got produced.
Hmm.
What was your impression the first time you heard a simple thing like that?
Well, I thought it was an incredibly beautiful song. Actually, the first version of it that I heard was for the callback, and they had me sing the reprise of it. which is the part that I sing in Act Two, and I was incredibly struck by the lyrics. First and foremost, it was something that, you know, even before knowing the full context of the musical, it was this Jewish person who was, in so few words, contemplating sort of what God means to him, if it's real, if it's not, and how that sort of fits into his Judaism. So that, first and foremost, I was like, "Whoa, that's heavy. That's something that I can relate to as a Jewish person." And then I heard the music for the first time, and I was like, "This is just beautiful." So I looked up the song, and I was able to find the sort of inception of a simple thing like that. And it's hard to find the script to the show because it was never produced. But it's these two men, and it seems like they're maybe fishing, or doing something like that, and they're singing this to each other. And it's, the context of it is so different from in the show, but the feeling of it sort of maintains. And it's just a classic Candor and Ebb song that I feel like something they do so well is incorporate like this light and dark in almost all of their music, that lives sort of paralleled and simultaneously at all times. I think that's something that I love about them, that you can listen to something and feel its lightness, but also feel how heavy it weighs on the people who are singing it. And I think that that is definitely true of a simple thing like that.
It's funny you mentioned that. And full disclosure, I'm not a Broadway critic, but I love Broadway, brought up on it. And I believe that, the character, as well as your portrayal of him, is so nuanced, the Alex Mann character. And, people might not even notice the fact that, you are the person that we find out about Jimmy Doyle's war story through the two scenes with Colton Ryan. And maybe the most gut-wrenching part of the show is when Alex talks about his family dying, him surviving the Holocaust, seeing the Star of David on the back of the violin. Alex also even gives us information about, Madame Veltry's loss of her son in the war. How do you prepare, and what experiences did you draw on for all that, while additionally, because you mentioned that light and dark, maintaining Alex's young man's immigrant experience of being this wide-eyed, kid going through so many things that were different to him. And in some respects, and it's going to sound kind of weird, but there was almost an Andy Kaufman like feel to Alex's innocence. So walk me through that.
I love the Andy Kaufman reference. I think that came from John Candor, really. When we talked about the character, he was adamant that Alex was the person in the show who has seen sort of the worst of it, I think. But and yet that was all he knew of his life. So it's that thing of your the tragic, so many tragic things can happen in your life, and yet instinctually, especially when we're young, we move forward. And this concept that the show brings up sort of a couple times, the world keeps spinning, we keep going, and we don't do it because we consciously make ourselves. We do it because we have to, and that's life. And when you're young, it's something that you don't have to contemplate as much, you just do. So I wanted to make sure that Alex was never, felt like he was weighing or had all of that stuff that had happened constantly weighing on him. Um, uh, um, and I wanted it to be something that could flip from something that was funny to something that was not so funny very fast, because that's how I think how it happens in life. You know, when I'm upset, or when something upsetting happens to me, um, I don't sit and stew about it until I feel, it comes when it comes, and when it's not there, it's not there. Um, um, and yeah, I think John was an enormous influence in how the character ended up being what it is. Thank you for saying that it's nuanced. That means a lot to me, because um, I try my best to make sure that um, there are little things in every show that, if we can pick up on, we pick up on, and if not, then we move past it. Uh, but yeah, the character is incredibly nuanced to me, and despite being maybe innocent and young, is incredibly complicated and has contains multitudes. So yeah, I'm not sure how to expand on it. I want to expand on the Andy Kaufman thing, but I don't know how.
Yeah, no, the same thing, because I got, because he was such an endearing character because of
Yeah.
his innocence, and that also comes through. I wasn't comparing the two, and also it's so interesting in the production. It's so big in so many ways that your role really is subtly is a driving force for all the other stories, which I just
Mhm.
found fascinating. It was great. Um, one of my favorite things to do, the second someone hands me the playbill and I take my seat, is I play Law and Order Jeopardy. Bingo. I go through the playbill and see how many people in the cast have appeared on a Law and Order. Three cast members of New York, New York. I'm just wondering, have you ever auditioned for a law? Because it's just amazing to me. It's the most frequently found words in a playbill.
I have auditioned for a Law and Order episode. Um, uh, yeah, I believe I have. It was very early on in the pandemic. Um, uh, yes, that I actually I know of people who literally have specific headshots dedicated to Law and Order, because they know they play or audition for specific characters in Law and Order. Um, uh, it's something I've talked to my agent about. I know exactly the type of character that I'd go in for, and I'm hoping that the next Broadway show you go see that I am in, I have that Law and Order credit under my bio as well.
Love it. Love it. So it's interesting. You're wearing a Met hat. So obviously you're a Met fan. You're on stage most of the time when the team's playing. How do you keep up with your favorite sports?
Um, uh, Yeah, I haven't been able to go to any games. It becomes increasingly difficult. I actually went to a Brooklyn Cyclones game on Monday. We had the Monday Tuesday off for July 4th, so I was able to go out and do that. But I watch the games during the show. I have it up on my computer. I have some downtime in between scenes, so I have the Met games up when I can. I had the Knick games up when they were playing. So I try to keep up. It's been a bit of a struggle and a sadness to keep up with my New York Mets this year. So I have to admit that some days I haven't had it in me to watch the games. Um, but yeah, I do. I share a dressing room with John Clay the third, who's plays Jesse, the trumpet player, and he's also a huge sports fan. So we're always, watching Sports Center on one of our computers, or have basketball games, baseball games. So we keep up when we can.
I don't know, that almost to me in my head, I'm seeing a Seinfeld episode where this rabid Met fan is about to go on stage and some horrible play, and then you just on
Oh,
stage like shaking your head like
literally, I've left my dressing room screaming at the computer and then walked right on stage.
awesome. All right. Lastly, two questions we ask all actors who have appeared on this show. Incidentally, one of your cast members has been on our show back in the day. Clyde was on.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, who is the current actor you admire most and why?
I'm not sure. I think the person that I always go back to is Michael C. Hall, who I haven't seen do things recently, but Six Feet Under is one of my favorite TV shows of all time, and I've had the pleasure of seeing him on stage multiple times in a play called The Realistic Joneses, and I saw him in Hedwig and the Angry Inch. I think he's just an incredibly versatile actor, also a very nuanced actor, who can do both stage and screen so well. And every time I watch him, I feel like I'm watching a wholly realized person. And that's always my go-to answer of actors that I definitely idolize, look up to, admire. It's been hard. I haven't been able to consume as much as I'd want to in terms of like new Broadway or even TV movies. I'm trying to like get back into the groove of watching things again. Um, so I haven't seen anything like recently where I'm like, oh my god, like that person. But I go back to Michael C. Hall whenever I think of that question.
All right. Lastly, and I have a feeling we might have already had a spoiler alert based on what you mentioned earlier. Um, if you had, what is your dream role? You know, the part you want, whether it be television, film, or Broadway.
Honestly, I think my dream role is Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof. And I know that might be a bit. It's not just because I'm Jewish. It's I think that the role, the movie is like one of my favorite movies of all time, uh, and it just looks like so much fun. The music, the complexity of that character. It's something that I probably will never have the opportunity to play. But if for some weird reason I do get to play it ever, that is definitely a dream of mine.
I thought we were going with cabaret, but all right, that's good.
I mean, Cabaret is one of my favorites as well. If I could do the MC, I mean that's something that I would have a lot of fear about, but a challenge that I would definitely love to take at some point.
Where's the best place for people to keep a touch with you on social media?
I have I'm bad with social media. I don't have an Instagram or anything like that. I have a Facebook. I have a page on my agency's website on uiatalent.com. I'm working on getting my own website up there. Potentially might make an Instagram. So keep on the lookout for that. But yeah, I'm bad at social media.
Oliver, thanks so much for your time. More importantly, for a great performance in New York, New York, currently playing at the St. James Theater.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. Great stuff.